My daughter was sitting on the floor of a Greyhound station at 11 o'clock at night with my granddaughter asleep in a stroller, and everything she owned in 2 garbage bags. That's the image I will carry for the rest of my life. Not the courtroom, not the sentencing, not the look on my son-in-law's face when he realized who actually signed his father's paychecks. My daughter on a dirty tile floor, still wearing her work badge, her shoes untied because she'd run. She called me from a number I didn't recognize. Her phone was dead. She'd borrowed one from a woman at the ticket counter. "Mom," she said, "I don't have anywhere to go. I was 40 minutes away. I made it in 26. When I pulled into the lot, I could see her through the glass doors. She hadn't moved." My granddaughter's stroller was angled toward the wall, a thin receiving blanket draped over it to block the fluorescent light. My daughter had her knees pulled up and her head down, and she was so still that for one terrible second I thought something had happened to her. I parked in the fire lane. I didn't care. I went through those doors and I knelt on that floor and I put my hands on both sides of her face the way I'd done since she was 4 years old and the neighborhood kids had told her she was too quiet to play with them. "I'm here," I said. "Stand up. We're going home." She stood. She didn't cry. That told me everything. The drive back to my house in Belle Meade took 31 minutes. Nashville was quiet that time of night, just the highway lights sliding across the windshield and my granddaughter making soft sleep sounds in the car seat I kept permanently installed in the back. My daughter stared out the passenger window and said nothing for 20 minutes. Then she said, "He told me if I called you, it would make everything worse." I kept my eyes on the road. "He was right," I said. "It is about to get worse. Just not for you." My housekeeper had the guest room made up by the time we arrived. I don't know how she knew. I hadn't called ahead. Maybe she heard the car in the driveway and saw my face. Maybe after 22 years of working for me, she understood the particular sound of my footsteps when something had gone wrong. I put the baby down. I ran a bath for my daughter. I laid out her old Vanderbilt sweatshirt on the bed, the one she'd left in her closet when she moved out. I went downstairs to my study, poured a bourbon I didn't touch, and stood at the window looking out at the Japanese maple my late husband had planted the year our daughter was born. That tree had survived an ice storm, a drought, and 32 Tennessee summers. It was still standing, so was I. Let me tell you what I knew before my daughter told me anything. My son-in-law's father had been managing a group of 4 assisted living facilities in the Nashville metro area for the past 6 years under a company called Crestwood Senior Living. He'd built a reputation as a community-minded businessman, gave talks at Rotary Club meetings, sponsored a Little League team, had his picture in the Nashville Business Journal twice. He believed he'd built Crestwood from scratch. He told people that at every opportunity. His wife, my daughter's mother-in-law, ran the billing department and kept the books, which should have been the first sign of trouble for anyone paying attention. What my son-in-law's father did not know, and what his wife did not know, and what my son-in-law certainly did not know, was that every building those 4 facilities operated in was owned by a company called Ironwood Capital, LLC. Ironwood Capital was mine. I'd incorporated it in Wyoming in 2015 through a registered agent in Cheyenne and a trust administered by a firm in Knoxville that had no visible connection to my name. I'd acquired those 4 properties over 3 years, quietly, through a series of transactions that looked, to anyone who wasn't looking carefully, like routine commercial trades. I'd been a real estate attorney for 34 years before I retired. I knew how to make transactions invisible. I'd written the playbook. I'd let my son-in-law's father sign the leases. I'd let him negotiate the vendor contracts. I'd let him hang his name on the walls and give speeches about dignity and elder care. I'd given him enough room to reveal who he really was. For the first 3 years, he'd been tolerable. Not good, but tolerable. He cut corners on staffing, underpaid the CNAs, decorated the lobbies beautifully while the back hallways needed paint. Typical, the kind of man who understands appearances better than substance. I watched, and I waited, and I took notes. Then my daughter married his son. Then she had a baby. Then the margins collapsed. My daughter came downstairs at 1 a.m. in the Vanderbilt sweatshirt. She looked 22 in it, not 31. She sat at the kitchen island and wrapped both hands around the tea I'd made her. Chamomile with honey, the same thing I'd been making her since she had the flu at age 9. She talked. It had started 3 weeks after my granddaughter was born. Her mother-in-law began showing up at the house unannounced, criticizing how my daughter held the baby, how she fed the baby, whether the house was clean enough, whether my daughter was doing enough, to support her husband's career. My daughter's husband stood in the doorway during these visits and said nothing. Then came the job. My son-in-law's father had offered my daughter a position as the administrative coordinator at the Crestwood location on Hillsborough Pike. Good salary, flexible hours, close to home. She'd been grateful. She'd thought she'd earned it because she was organized and efficient and had a business degree from Belmont. She had earned it. She was all of those things. But I had also made a quiet phone call to the HR consultant who handled Crestwood's hiring, a woman who owed me a professional favor from a decade ago. I'd suggested my daughter's name. Not to get her the job, she wouldn't have needed that. I needed to place her inside the organization so I could see through her experience what they were doing when they thought nobody with power was watching. It turned out they were doing a lot. 6 weeks ago, my daughter had found a file on the shared drive that wasn't supposed to be there. A spreadsheet with resident names, insurance policy numbers, and billing codes that didn't match any services in the system. She'd mentioned it to her mother-in-law, thinking it was a clerical error. 2 days later, her mother-in-law had come to the house with a folder of bank statements. She'd spread them across the kitchen table and pointed to charges, cash advances, credit card payments my daughter had never seen before. 3 credit cards, all in my daughter's name. Total balance, $63,000. Home improvement purchases, designer clothing, a lease payment on a BMW my daughter had never driven. My son-in-law had come home during this confrontation. He'd looked at the statements, looked at his mother, looked at my daughter, and said, "Maybe you should stay somewhere else tonight until we sort this out." My daughter had packed the 2 garbage bags while her mother-in-law watched from the hallway. "And the bruise?" I asked. My daughter had a mark along her jawline, just below her left ear. She'd been holding her hair over it since she arrived. "I tripped getting the stroller out of the closet," she said. She said it while looking at her tea. "I didn't push. I filed it in the same place I'd kept every detail about that family for 6 years. I waited until she was asleep. Then I called Malcolm. Malcolm Jeffries had been my private investigator for 18 years. Before that, he'd been a forensic accountant with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. He was methodical, discreet, and entirely without sentiment. He answered on the second ring, despite the hour. "I need every financial record connected to Crestwood Senior Living," I said. "Every vendor contract, every payroll disbursement, every insurance claim filed in the last 4 years. I need the credit card applications opened in my daughter's name. And I need it in 72 hours. Understood. Anything else?" The billing spreadsheet she found. "I need a copy before they delete it. If it was on a shared server, there's a backup. I'll have it." After I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. The maple was dark against the sky, just a shape, but I knew every branch. I'd watched that tree grow for 32 years. I'd learned patience from it. Patience and the understanding that roots do their work underground, where nobody thinks to look. Malcolm arrived 3 days later. He carried a leather portfolio, no labels, no markings. He sat across from me in the study and opened it without preamble. 4 credit cards, he said, not 3. Total balance across all 4, $63,400. Opened over the last 14 months using your daughter's social security number. The applications were submitted online from an IP address registered to the Crestwood Hillsborough Pike location, her mother-in-law's office. Yes, the purchases are a mix. Construction materials consistent with the renovation of the Green Hills facility last year, personal luxury items, and approximately $11,000 in cash advances. The cash was withdrawn from ATMs in the Brentwood area. My daughter didn't live in Brentwood. Her in-laws did. "There's more," Malcolm said. He turned to the next document. "The billing spreadsheet your daughter found. I pulled the backup from the cloud server before it was deleted, which happened, incidentally, 12 hours after she mentioned it to her mother-in-law. I looked at the printout. Rows of resident names, insurance codes, service dates. Malcolm had highlighted the discrepancies in yellow. They've been billing Medicare for services that were never provided, he said. Physical therapy sessions, specialized wound care, psychiatric consultations. Over the past 3 years, the total overbilling comes to approximately $740,000. I set the document down. Outside, a robin landed on the maple branch and then was gone. "The payroll?" I asked. "The payroll processing was moved 8 months ago to a new company called Volunteer Payroll Solutions. I traced the incorporation. It's registered under the mother-in-law's maiden name through a P.O. box in Murfreesboro. They've been skimming roughly $40 a month from the CNA payroll pool by inflating hours for employees who don't exist. Ghost employees, the oldest trick in a small operation, lazy and effective. When did they start using my daughter's social security number? Malcolm checked his notes. The first application was submitted 5 months after the wedding, so this had been deliberate from the start. Not opportunism, not desperation, a plan. They'd married their son to a woman with clean credit and a mother they assumed was just a retired lawyer living comfortably in Belmead. They hadn't looked deeper than that. People rarely do when they've already decided they're the smartest one in the room. I closed the portfolio. Freeze Crestwood's operating line of credit, I said. Effective immediately. Ironwood Capital has standing authority through the lease agreements. Invoke the financial compliance clause. Malcolm's expression didn't change. That'll disrupt vendor payments within the week. Medical supply deliveries, food service contracts. I know. Contact Dr. Rhonda Satterfield, the medical director at the Hillsborough Pike location. Quietly. Tell her there's a compliance review underway and she should expect direct contact from Ironwood Capital and the payroll company. Terminate the contract. Cite vendor fraud under Clause 9 of the Services Agreement. You wrote that clause. I write all my own clauses, Malcolm. He closed the portfolio. You anticipated this. I prepared for it, I said. There's a difference. After he left, I went upstairs to check on my granddaughter. She was awake in the portable crib, holding one foot in both hands with an expression of profound concentration, as if she'd just discovered something extraordinary about her own toes. I reached down and she grabbed my finger. The grip strikes me. Small hands, tremendous certainty. Good morning, beautiful, I said. She responded with a sound that contained no words and every possible meaning. My daughter appeared in the doorway. He called, she said quietly. My husband. He says his parents have already spoken to a lawyer. He says they want to discuss custody. I looked at my granddaughter, who had moved on from my finger to a serious examination of my watch band. Then we should call ours, I said. Judith Crane had been waiting for this call since I'd texted her 2 days earlier. She was 61, kept her silver hair in a low bun that she never touched during trial, and had practiced family law in Tennessee for 33 years without ever losing her composure or a custody case she believed in. I hadn't mentored her. We'd come up together, two women in a profession that hadn't been designed for us, and we'd survived it the same way, by being better prepared than every man in the room. She arrived at my house with a legal pad and a calm that could quiet a courtroom. She sat at my kitchen island and listened to my daughter tell her story from the beginning. Every criticism from the mother-in-law, every silent evening with a husband who had stopped pretending to be interested, every time her in-laws had shown up and rearranged something in the house as if they were adjusting the set of a play they'd written. Judith wrote everything without interrupting. Then she set her pen down. The credit cards, documented, I said, 4 accounts, $63,400. Applications traced to the mother-in-law's FSC pay the Medicare fraud, $740,000 over 3 years. My daughter's hand went to her jaw. She looked at the table. Judith waited. She had a particular way of waiting that didn't feel like pressure. It felt like the room had simply decided to hold still until the truth had enough space to exist. He grabbed me, my daughter said, by the arm. When I tried to leave with the baby, my face hit the door frame. Judith wrote that down with the same steady hand she'd used for everything else. What's been done to you, she said, is criminal on multiple fronts. Identity theft, wire fraud, Medicare fraud, domestic assault. We can pursue criminal referrals, civil action, and a protective order simultaneously. She glanced at me. How far do you want this to go? I looked at my daughter. She was holding her mug with both hands, staring at the countertop, the same posture as the night before. But something was different. Her back was straight. Her breathing was even. All of it, my daughter said. Judith picked up her pen. Let's start with the protective order. Malcolm called me 5 days later. He was in his car outside the Crestwood facility on Hillsborough Pike. The credit freeze hit their operating accounts this morning, he said. They missed a payment to their food service vendor. The medical supply company is demanding prepayment for the next delivery, and the payroll didn't process. His response? Your son-in-law's father has been on the phone since 7 a.m. He called the building management company 4 times about the lease status. He's just found out that Ironwood Capital exists. Has he made the connection? Not yet. He told the property manager, and I'm reading from the voicemail transcription, that he built this company from nothing, and no holding company from Wyoming is going to tell him how to run his business. I almost laughed. And the mother-in-law? She was at the Hillsborough Pike office until midnight last night. Server access logs show she was deleting files. Unfortunately for her, everything was already backed up to the cloud server I accessed last week. Beautiful. There's one more thing, Malcolm said. I found someone. Her name was Tamara Osis. She'd worked as the accounts receivable specialist at the Crestwood Green Hills location for 2.5 years. She'd been fired 11 months ago after she questioned a series of Medicare claims that didn't match the services in the patient charts. What actually happened? I asked. She found the billing discrepancy, Malcolm said. She flagged it internally, filed a written report with the compliance officer. 2 weeks later, she was terminated for performance issues. The documentation used to justify her firing was backdated. I confirmed that with the metadata on the original Word files. She reported it externally, filed a complaint with the Office of Inspector General. It was reviewed and closed. Crestwood's attorney submitted a response disputing her claims and questioning her credentials. The complaint died. Set up a meeting, I said, today if possible. Don't tell her who's asking. Tell her the person who owns the Green Hills building wants to have a conversation. She may not come. She'll come. People who saved their documentation for 11 months are waiting for someone to ask. Tamara arrived at my house at 3 p.m. in a navy blazer and sensible flats, carrying a messenger bag with a worn leather strap. She sat across from me in the living room with her hands folded in her lap and a look on her face that I recognized immediately. It was the expression of a person who had been disbelieved by people with authority and had decided to stop expecting anything from people with authority, but who hadn't yet given up entirely. I told her about Ironwood Capital, about the payroll skimming, the credit cards in my daughter's name, the scope of the Medicare fraud. I watched her face as the pieces connected. Her expression moved from guarded to focused to something that looked like relief and anger arriving at the same time. The billing discrepancy I found was $189,000 over 9 months, she said. Phantom therapy sessions. They were billing for physical therapy visits with residents who were bedridden and hadn't left their rooms in months. I cross-referenced the billing codes with the actual patient charts. Nothing matched. Who told you to stop looking? The son, she said. Your son-in-law. He came to my office on a Friday afternoon and told me the billing system was being migrated to a new platform and the discrepancies were artifacts from the transition. He said it very smoothly. He had this way of talking that made you feel like you were the one who didn't understand. I know that voice, I said. I didn't stop looking, she said. I just stopped telling anyone what I was finding. She reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. 11 months, she said. Screen captures, billing records, patient chart comparisons, the original compliance report with every signature. I kept copies of everything before they locked me out of the system. I took the envelope. I opened it. The documentation was meticulous, organized chronologically, cross-referenced, annotated in neat handwriting in the margins. This woman had built a case without a lawyer, without resources, without anyone telling her she was right. How would you feel about coming back to work at Crestwood? I said. She looked at me for a long moment. You're serious. The current management won't be in place much longer. Dr. Satterfield is an excellent clinician, and she deserves a billing team she can trust. I'd reinstate your position with full back pay for 11 months. Tamara looked at the envelope on the table, then at me, then at the window behind me, where the afternoon sun was coming through the curtains. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. 3 weeks after I found my daughter on the floor of that bus station, I attended the Nashville Senior Care Leadership Dinner at the Hermitage Hotel. My son-in-law's father was receiving the Community Service Award. The selection committee had, until 48 hours ago, had no reason to reconsider. The gala chairwoman was someone I'd known for 15 years. I called her the morning before the event. Loretta, she said, what exactly are you planning? I told her the outline. There was a long pause. I'll make sure your technician has access to the AV system, she said. And Loretta, wear something nice. My daughter did not attend. I didn't want her there. This was not her burden to carry. She was at my house with the baby, and with Judith, reviewing the final protective order paperwork, and with Tamara, who had become in the span of 2 weeks something that resembled a friend. I arrived at the Hermitage Hotel at 6:30 in a black jacket and my mother's pearl earrings, carrying a clutch and a USB drive Malcolm had handed me that morning. He'd been thorough. He was always thorough. The ballroom held 250 people. Nashville's senior care community, hospital executives, state legislators, philanthropists, the kind of people who assume that influence wears a name tag and sits in the front row. I chose a seat near the back. Malcolm stood near the service entrance in a dark sport coat that made him part of the wallpaper. My son-in-law's father worked the room with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned in a way he couldn't deflect. He wore a navy suit with an American flag pin on the lapel. He laughed at things that weren't funny and touched people's shoulders while he talked, claiming space the way certain men do, not because they've earned it, but because no one has stopped them. His son sat 2 tables from the stage, my son-in-law. He looked polished. He always looked polished. That was the skill his parents had given him, the ability to present surfaces so smooth that no one thought to check what was underneath. His mother sat beside him, her posture rigid and perfect. She wore a silk blouse and a gold necklace and an expression of absolute entitlement. She was the one I'd been watching most carefully. The father was greedy and careless. The mother was precise. The program began at 7:30. 3 awards, polite applause, the kind of evening that follows a script. My son-in-law's father's award was last. The MC called his name warmly, mentioned the 4 Crestwood facilities, the community partnerships, the scholarship fund for nursing students. My son-in-law's father walked to the podium and accepted the Crystal Award and set it on the lectern and looked out at the room the way a man looks at something he believes belongs to him. Everything I've built, he said, has been built on one principle, that our elders deserve the same dignity, the same care, the same respect that we would want for ourselves. He paused for effect. My family has dedicated itself to this mission, my wife, my son. We are a family business in the truest sense, and I am proud of what we've accomplished together. I sent Malcolm one word. Now, the screen behind the podium changed. It didn't happen dramatically. The room's lights shifted the way they do for a presentation, and the projection screen came alive with what looked, at first, like a standard financial overview. Numbers, columns, clean formatting. But the numbers were wrong. Or rather, they were right, and that was the problem. 14 months of Medicare billing records. Each line color-coded, white for legitimate claims, red for services never rendered. The screen was a wall of red. The murmur started at the front of the room and moved backward like a wave. My son-in-law's father turned and looked at the screen. His smile stayed on his face for 3 full seconds after his brain had registered the problem. I counted. The screen changed again. 4 credit card applications. My daughter's name, my daughter's signature. A forensic handwriting analysis in the lower corner confirming the signatures were forged. Someone in the second row said, "What is this?" My son-in-law's father reached for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be some kind of technical error. If we could just..." His audio cut. Malcolm's technician at the AV console had removed his mic channel from the board. He tapped the microphone. He looked toward the wings of the stage. He looked toward the back of the room with an expression that was beginning to curdle. The screen kept going. Payroll records from Volunteer Payroll Solutions. Ghost employee entries highlighted in yellow. Routing numbers traced to an account under the mother-in-law's maiden name. Dollar amounts. Dates. Everything. Then the voicemail. My son-in-law's voice came through the ballroom speakers, calm and rehearsed, the voice he used when he wanted to sound like a reasonable man delivering an unreasonable threat. "People in Nashville know who your family is, Loretta. It would be very unfortunate if your professional reputation became part of this conversation." Then my voice. Measured, unimpressed. "I appreciate the call. You'll be hearing from my attorney. 250 people in formal wear." Silent. Tamara stood from her seat in the middle of the room. I hadn't asked her to come. She'd decided that on her own. She walked toward the stage with the posture of someone who had been carrying something heavy for 11 months and had just decided to set it down. She climbed the stairs, stepped to the podium, and adjusted the microphone that was still live because it wasn't the one they'd cut. "My name is Tamara Osi," she said. "I was the accounts receivable specialist at Crestwood Senior Living's Green Hills location for 2.5 years. I was fired because I found billing fraud. I was told I was incompetent. I was told I didn't understand the system." She looked directly at my son-in-law's father, who stood at the side of the stage holding a Crystal Award that no longer meant what he thought it meant when he accepted it. "I understood the system," she said. "I understood it well enough to save everything." She set her envelope on the podium. My son-in-law was already moving. He pushed back from his table and walked toward the service exit with the quick, controlled stride of a man who has calculated exactly how many steps it takes to reach a door. Two men from the private security firm I'd retained stepped into his path. They weren't aggressive. They were simply there, solid and unhurried, the way a locked door is there. He stopped. His mother was still seated at their table, perfectly still, her hands folded, her face a mask that I recognized as the expression of a woman who has already begun composing her version of events. Judith entered from the main doors with an investigator from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation whom she'd been in contact with for 8 days. Two officers from the Metro Nashville Police followed. The crowd parted. I stood and walked to the stage. I didn't rush. I climbed the stairs and stood beside Tamara and looked out at 250 faces that had for the first time all evening stopped performing. "My name is Loretta Graves," I said. "Some of you know me. For those who don't, I am the founder of Ironwood Capital, LLC, which owns every property in which Crestwood Senior Living operates." The sound that moved through the room was not a gasp. It was the collective recalibration of 250 people who had just realized the ground was shaped differently than they'd assumed. "I've owned those properties since 2015, I said, "and I've been watching what was done inside them. I watched a family use my buildings to defraud Medicare of $740,000. I watched them open credit cards in my daughter's name and steal her identity to fund their personal expenses. I watched them fire a dedicated employee who had the integrity to speak up, and I watched them use my daughter's trust, her home, and her sense of safety as tools." I paused. Let the room hold what it needed to hold. "I didn't build this presentation to humiliate anyone," I said. I looked at my son-in-law's father. "I built it because silence is how these things survive, and I have no patience left for silence." The TBI investigator reached the base of the stage stairs. My son-in-law's father watched her approach. His face had cycled through several expressions in the last 10 minutes and had settled on something that looked like a man watching a building he thought he owned being reclaimed by the ground it stood on. He was still holding the Crystal Award when the officer asked him to step down from the stage. The mother-in-law was escorted separately. She went quietly, which didn't surprise me. Quiet was how she'd operated for years. It was also how she'd be dismantled. My daughter was asleep when I got home. The baby was asleep. The house was quiet in the way that houses are when the right people are inside them and the wrong ones are not. I stood in my kitchen and drank a glass of water and listened to the silence and felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years, the absence of vigilance. Just for a moment, just long enough to breathe. In the weeks that followed, the TBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office filed charges: Medicare fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, domestic assault. Judith told me early on that cases with this level of documentation tend to move quickly, and she was right. Judges clear their calendars for evidence this clean. My son-in-law's father was sentenced to 16 years federal. My daughter's mother-in-law received 12. She had been, as I'd suspected, the architect of the financial scheme. The father had been the front. She had been the engine. My son-in-law received 6 years, reduced for cooperation that led investigators to additional fraud in a network of shell companies across 3 states. My daughter stood in the hallway of the federal courthouse afterward, the baby on her hip, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in a very long time. Not happiness, something steadier than happiness. The look of someone who has felt the ground stop moving under her feet. "I should have called you that first night," she said. I took the baby and settled her on my hip. My granddaughter reached for my earring immediately, which was her custom. "You called me when you were ready," I said. "That's the only thing that matters." Tamara returned to Crestwood the following month. Her first act was to implement a billing compliance system she'd been designing in her head for 11 months while she waited. Dr. Satterfield sent me a handwritten note on her personal stationery thanking me for what she called, in her careful clinical way, the restoration of ethical operations. I put the note in the drawer where I keep things that matter. The drawer is getting full. That's a good thing. 4 months after the bus station, I drove to my daughter's new apartment in East Nashville. She'd chosen it herself. A 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor with windows that faced south, so the light came in warm and steady all afternoon. She'd hung curtains she'd picked out at a shop on Gallatin Road, pale yellow, the color of the chamomile tea I'd been making her since she was 9. I brought groceries and a small wooden rocking horse I'd found at an antique store in Franklin. Hand-painted, slightly uneven, the kind of thing someone had made with care a long time ago for a child they loved. My granddaughter was in the living room on a quilt, surrounded by board books she was examining with the focus of a literary critic conducting a major reassessment. She looked up when she heard my voice and made a sound that I can only describe as delight that has not yet learned to be cautious, and she held up both arms. I sat down on the quilt. My daughter came in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, and stopped in the doorway and watched us, and she smiled. Not a guarded smile, not a smile that was managing something behind it, a smile with nothing hidden in it. "I've been thinking about going back to school," she said. "Tell me physician assistant program. There's one at Trevecca that starts in January." I picked up one of the board books my granddaughter had discarded. It had a picture of a duck on the cover. The duck looked optimistic. "I think that's a wonderful idea." My daughter leaned against the door frame and crossed her arms and looked at me with an expression that was new, something between gratitude and the kind of quiet authority that comes from having survived something and knowing it. "Mom," she said, "do you really think we'll be okay?" I looked at my granddaughter, who had discovered that the wooden rocking horse could be tipped over and found this hilarious, and was now attempting to tip it over again with tremendous determination, absolutely certain that the thing she wanted was within reach. "We'll be more than okay," I said. "Not because the hard part is finished, because you know something about yourself now that you didn't know before. You know what you can walk through. Nobody gets to take that from you." My granddaughter got the horse to tip. She shrieked with joy. She pushed it upright. She tipped it again. The delight was undiminished. It was, in fact, increasing. I stayed all afternoon. We sat on the quilt, the three of us, and my daughter stacked books into towers that my granddaughter knocked down with a flat palm and a laugh that filled every corner of that small apartment. The towers went up. The towers came down. We built them again. Before I left, I stopped at the door and turned back. My daughter was on the floor with the baby, holding the rocking horse steady while my granddaughter tried to figure out how the tail worked. The afternoon light came through those yellow curtains and made everything look the way a room looks when the people inside it are safe and know it. "Don't go yet," my daughter said without looking up. So I set my bag down. I took off my coat. I sat back on the quilt. Later, someone will ask me whether I regret the years I spent watching, waiting, accumulating information, building protections my daughter didn't know existed. Whether it would have been better to act sooner, to warn her directly, to force a conversation before a bus station floor and a bruised jaw and a baby with nowhere to go. I've thought about that. Here is what I know. You cannot love someone into safety before they are ready to see the danger. You can only make sure that when they finally reach for you, your hand is there and it's holding something solid. My daughter starts the PA program in January. Tamara is running the billing department at Crestwood with the she hired herself and a compliance system that 3 other senior care networks in Tennessee have asked to license. My granddaughter took her first steps on a Wednesday morning, 9 small unsteady steps between the coffee table and my daughter's outstretched hands. My daughter sent me the video at 6:47 a.m. I watched it 6 times. Then I made my coffee and stood at the window and looked at the Japanese maple, which was turning red the way it does every October, whether the year has been gentle or brutal, whether the people watching have earned the beauty or simply lasted long enough to witness it. Some things return regardless of what we've been through. That's not luck, that's roots. If this story reached you today, hear me. I am talking to you now, not about revenge, not about power, about paying attention, about asking the hard questions before someone you love is sitting on a cold floor in the middle of the night, wondering if anyone is coming. Build your foundations before the storm. Love loudly. And when someone in your family calls and says, "I don't know what to do," make sure your first words are always the same. "Stay where you are. I'm on my way."